Ayo, back at it again with another video. Thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it. So this is part 6 in my high-speed rail series here starting on the channel. So this is talking about I-70 as kind of like a route for high-speed rail across the country. So it starts over here in Utah. I-15 comes up from SoCal up to Salt Lake. And then I-70 starts in Utah, goes through Denver, Colorado, goes through all of Colorado, all through Kansas, all through Missouri, into Illinois, Indiana, Columbus, through Ohio, Pennsylvania, and then ends, looks like, in Baltimore. However, for this, I'm probably going to cut it at Indianapolis. So Utah and Colorado, all the way to Illinois, Indiana, and probably end at Indianapolis. So this is again part 6, so I'm going to do a recap on the other parts of the series. So I talked about an I-25 high-speed rail corridor from El Paso all the way through Santa Fe, Albuquerque, New Mexico, up through Colorado, and even into Wyoming. I-10, it was part 4, LA to Phoenix to Tucson to El Paso to the Texas Triangle, San Antonio, and Houston. I-15 from SoCal to Salt Lake. You have San Diego, LA, Vegas, and Salt Lake City. Part 2, I talked about California, so from SoCal, LA, San Diego, all the way up to San Francisco and Sacramento. And in part 1, I talked about Seattle to Sacramento. So Seattle, Portland, down to Sacramento. At that point, it would tie in to California's high-speed rail at Sacramento, go down to SoCal. At that point, you could have another high-speed rail from Los Angeles to Vegas, up to Salt Lake, and along I-15 corridor. Part 4, which then you have LA to Phoenix to El Paso, and then the Texas Triangle. And then from El Paso, you can have a front range high-speed rail from El Paso all the way up through New Mexico, through Colorado, and into Wyoming. But this part is we're going to have I-70 starting in Utah, go all the way to Indianapolis. So that's a considerable distance. So let's measure it out. We're going to measure distance. Grand Junction, Denver, and then we could stop in Aurora, Burlington, Oakley, Hayes, Abilene, Topeka, run through Kansas City, Columbia, St. Louis. I-70 goes through Illinois, stops in Terre Haute, and we're going to end in Indianapolis. So that is roughly 1,440 miles. It's probably closer to 1,500, honestly. Some of my lines aren't measuring up with the interstate itself, but that is one potential route across the country. From Utah all the way to Indianapolis, you can have another route maybe from Seattle through Montana, North Dakota, into Minnesota, or maybe you could even figure out a way of having Vancouver to Calgary, and then Winnipeg, and then down through Minnesota, Wisconsin, Chicago. The only challenge with the Vancouver to Winnipeg would probably be the mountains here. So ultimately, I-70 goes further. It goes through Columbus, looks like through Pittsburgh area, and then into Baltimore. But for our high-speed rail, we're talking about only Salt Lake City area, Utah, through Indianapolis, which is about 1,500 miles roughly. We got 1,440, but we're going to look at different metro areas we can kind of connect on this route. This is one of the cross-country routes that I think would be a very interesting idea to look into. So let's see if we can find We got Denver, population of about 3 million. Denver, Aurora, Greeley, roughly 3 million. We also have Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas, roughly 2.2 million. You're connecting. Indianapolis, about 2.1. So you're already probably up to about 5 or 6 million that you're connecting at this point. Probably closer to 5. What else? I don't think we're going through Omaha, unfortunately. Let's find one more that we're going through. We're going through Wichita, St. Louis, also. Did I miss St. Louis on here? Or did I already talk about that? Maybe oh, there we go. I didn't miss it. So St. Louis at 2.8. Okay. So St. Louis 2.8. You're looking at Denver 2.9, roughly 3 million. Connecting Indianapolis about 2.1, and then a couple of ones in between. So all along the route, you're looking at, a couple million in the Denver metro, a couple million here in Kansas City, a couple million here in St. Louis, and a couple million here. Basically, you're probably looking at about 8 to 10 million people that you're connecting. But obviously there's a lot of the country in this part is very remote, so you're not going to connect a whole lot of people that way, unless you do Salt Lake City to Omaha and then on to Chicago. Chicago is obviously a big city, but Omaha and Salt Lake are not that large of cities in comparison to Chicago. The reason why I chose this route is because there's a little bit more population spread out evenly across it. Got roughly 3 million in Colorado, Denver metro, a couple million here, a couple million there, and then a couple million at the bookend here in Indianapolis. So I chose this route for a transcontinental high-speed rail route because I felt this population was distributed a little bit more evenly across many different cities. Across Denver, across Kansas City, across St. Louis, across Indianapolis. So that would be a route across the country from Utah to Indiana. And then you can start getting in. Obviously, there's a lot of population around here. You can maybe get like a Boston to Atlanta, and then like an Atlanta to Chicago, kind of like V-looking shape. And then maybe if you really want to, you can get like a Chicago back to Boston along the Great Lakes. You get Cleveland, you can go up to Detroit, you can go up to Buffalo, Albany. So I felt like this route would be a great cross-country route. The views are great. There's a lot of open space, especially once you get into Kansas and Missouri. The sites would be gorgeous to, look at. But yeah, I think this would be a great route. It's roughly 1,500 miles across the country. Connect, the West to the Midwest, and then ultimately, if you have high-speed rail, you can maybe go from like Minneapolis down to Chicago, down to Indy, down to Atlanta, and then, that's how you would connect to the Midwest. And then maybe like Atlanta back up to Charlotte and Washington and Philly and New York and Boston. So that's kind of my thinking on that. I think it would be a great route. Obviously, you could go further into Columbus, into Baltimore. Maybe, I don't think it goes through Pittsburgh, but I would personally end the I-70 line at Indianapolis, because then you can go have another line from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Chicago, through Illinois, down to Louisville, Nashville, and end in Atlanta. So that is the end of the video. That is part 6 of my high-speed rail series for the United States. This has been I-70 high-speed rail concept from Utah to Indianapolis, Indiana. With that is the end of the video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Deuces.